Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Scrubbed In Show. I hope you've all been keeping well. This week we have with us another impressive guest. We have with us Jessica Smith, who is the co-founder and the CXO at SomX, which I'm sure you all know about. It's a massive pleasure having you on the show. We know you've had a stint in PR, marketing agencies, all those weird and wonderful things, which I'm sure the vast majority of listeners will be clueless about. So we're here to shed a bit of light. But an absolute pleasure having you on the show, Jess. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And I have to say, it is a different kind of imposter syndrome being interviewed on a podcast for clinicians by clinicians, generally interviewing clinicians. So I will do my very best to live up to those lofty expectations without pretending that I'm a clinician of any variety. Although there was a time once in my life where I thought that maybe that was the route I wanted to go down until I realised I was scared of blood. So probably not the right career path for me, thankfully. But yes, thank you for having me. Very pleased to be here.
No, definitely. And I think the world of healthcare is emerging, health tech, med tech, and it's just not just clinicians. It's everyone with different skill sets. And I think you'd be a wonderful guest. So, present time, you're running the shop floor with James SomX, working with a variety of companies, pharma, med tech, devices, helping the communication strategy, branding, content. We know it didn't happen overnight. We know it's been a long graft, and I'm going to touch on that because I saw something I wanted to touch on. But take us to the very beginning of this journey. I know you mentioned maybe you wanted to go down this clinical route and then you realized you wasn't meant. Tell us a bit about the journey that brought you to kind of founding SomX.
Cool. So I guess I have always been interested in healthcare, in science. I don't think I truly realised I was particularly creative until much later. And on reflection, I think, maybe I should have done some different A levels, but I'd always gone down the science route. Been really active, love sport, thought, I know what I want to do. I want to be a sports medicine doctor. And then I think probably coupled with realizing I wasn't a fan of blood and it was a very long route to get there, decided that wasn't quite going to be the journey that I wanted to go on. And I'm a really impatient person, so tell me that's going to take me 10 years to get somewhere, and that's definitely off the table for me. So I actually went to university to study something called sports therapy, which is not registered by the healthcare, is not registered by the HCPC. And at the time, I was assured it was imminent. And through the duration of the 4 years that I studied, I was still assured it was imminent, and it never came to fruition. It's still not registered now, and it basically has to go through government, and it's clearly not a priority. And can you blame them? And in order to be able to do the job I wanted to do, work with sports teams and have that, I guess, like healthcare element, that just wasn't going to work for me. However, as well as realizing earlier I didn't like blood, I started my course and then realized I didn't like touching people, which was also a big barrier to my professional development as a sports therapist. And various reasons I tried to change course, various reasons couldn't, and just thought, you know what, I will get a degree. A degree is as good as, anything. At least I've got one. I'm vaguely interested in it. It will be fine. And through that process, realised I enjoyed writing. Though I loved the writing assignments. I loved my dissertation. I really loved it. And so basically just decided, let's double down on what I do enjoy. So got experience pretty much with...
She loves her dissertation.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much the only thing I did enjoy, but that's not true. I loved uni. It's great. Although I'm not sure I would pay $9,000 for it now. I was lucky enough not to be in that before that cohort of people where the price rocketed. But anyway, yeah, I just got experience from anywhere that would really have me. So that was charities, mainly charities, to be honest. And then got my first job working in a trust of an NHS trust in Worcester. And that was kind of my very first communications role. And so landed kind of by accident, I think, in a healthcare comms role, largely because I had a background in science and I liked writing and being creative. I then moved on from there and worked for various public sector organisations, including Borough Police Force. So that was an interesting experience, but a good one nonetheless. Some more charities, the kind of consumer, public sector, not public sector, consumer and retail. And then I was living in Devon at the time, which is a great place to grow up. If you want a career that is exciting, fast moving, the sky's the limit kind of thing, Devon is not the right place for that. Beautiful beaches, beautiful countryside. As I say, I did it growing up, but I reached a ceiling pretty quickly and decided that actually London was the city of opportunity. So let's go there. And so much so that in one of my interviews, I was applying anyway. And in one of my interviews, I was asked why I wanted the job. And I said that basically to progress in Devon, I had to wait for someone to retire or die. And whilst that was the truth, it probably wasn't the interview answer that I should have given, and needless to say, I didn't get the job. So I basically just kept applying, and I'd ended up applying to a role at the Royal College of Physicians, one of many that I had applied for, and not because I had a particular interest in health necessarily, but just I wanted a job in London, so I'll just apply. Anyway, I got the job, and that was my ticket to London. And then when I got there, a whole world opened up to me, I think. And it was there that I got to work on a lot of quality improvement programs. I got stuck into the comms and the public affairs around the junior doctor strike. So it was a really cool time to be there. It was really interesting. Probably not cool if you were a junior doctor at the time, but it was cool to be a part of that movement and kind of be in the weeds of everything that was going on at the time that the then President Jane Dacre was having weekly, if not daily, meetings with Jeremy Hunt, who was the health secretary at the time, being involved in drafting her statements, her public statements on the topic. And a lot of those conversations about how the role of, I suppose, the Royal Colleges and the Royal College of Physicians in particular in protecting the profession and doctors at large and healthcare professionals. And I learned a lot there. I learned a lot about communications in healthcare. I learned a lot about the political landscape in healthcare and how politics influences healthcare so heavily. And just a lot about clinical life, I think. But it's also the first time I really got my first taste of Healthtech. And they were running a program called the Health Informatics Unit. And that was kind of like the first time anyone had really given that much thought to how does technology affect delivery of patient care, how clinicians do their job, and how patients access information. And it was incredibly interesting. It was very, very grassroots. It was kind of the first time anyone had really given it any thought, I think. And it was ultimately what seeded what is now the Faculty of Clinical Informatics, which is a collaboration between several of the Royal Colleges. But it's really cool and interesting to be a part of those conversations and hear from different stakeholders, different sides of the table about the role that technology could and should play for better or worse, and the reservations that people had, and how much trust should we be putting into technology. And it was great. I really enjoyed that. But again, being the precocious person that I was, after a period of time, realized that, as you do, there are other areas that I wanted to explore. And I think, ironically, actually, for a period of time, because of a TV program I watched, I was dead set on being the head of comms for the Met Police. Looking back, I am so glad that is not the route that I went down. I would not want to be there right now. And it sounds like an absolute minefield. Although an exciting challenge, I'm sure. Kudos to whoever's doing that. But I realised that the role I was doing at the Royal College of Physicians was what you'd call in-house. So that means that you are a communications professional that works within an organisation and you're doing the communications. The other way of utilizing communications capability, I suppose, is by using an agency. So that is an agency, a organization that provides a service with well, it can be anything, but in this instance, communications. And, there are lots of benefits to that. There is also a cost to that, for better or worse. And I was very aware that agencies worked in a different way. And in order to be able to be the best communications professional that I could be, I needed to be able to see both sides of the table, know how to not run an agency, because I had no aspirations to actually have my own at that point, but know how to manage an agency as an in-house person, but also how to operate within an agency and how that differed. What I didn't realise is that most healthcare agencies predominantly focus on pharma. And as with many interviews, I think often that experience is a joint interview almost between both you and the organisation you're interviewing with. And they for sure oversell you on who their clients are. And it sounded like they had some great public sector clients and NGOs and that kind of thing. The reality is it's mainly pharma. And the reason for that is because pharma have the big budgets. And so that's why they are able to utilise external expertise in a way that most other healthcare organisations can't. And so that was a baptism of fire for sure. It was very, very different, despite the fact I had a really solid grounding in communications and in healthcare. But what I realised very quickly was that I had a really unique vantage point where I understood what I consider to be the whole healthcare ecosystem. So it's not just pharma, it's not just the NHS, it's both of those as part of one world and everything in between that, all the other players too. And no one else really got that. And I never really understood why, because we're talking about healthcare, and how can you just be talking to one person or one particular type of person to achieve something, because it takes many. But I learned why they do things the way they do in agencies, and I learned all about pharma, and I learned all about the ABPI and regulation of medicines and what it takes to bring a medicine to market, and how pharma companies operate commercially and how they decide where to focus their attentions and energies, and how they collaborate with patient groups, for example. And so, again, learn a great deal. And while I was at the Royal College of Physicians, that was where I met James. He was on the FMLM fellowship and at Health Education England. He later moved on to the Digital Health London Accelerator. And so we had kind of the shared interest of health tech. And he had identified that a lot of the companies he was working with had this communication need, where they knew they needed to communicate their value, but didn't know how to do that in a coherent and consistent way that really, I guess, aligned with the pain points of various stakeholders or customers, but equally understanding, by contrast to pharma, for example, in health tech, you need to be able to communicate with everyone along that ecosystem, because within the same day, you're going to be having an investor conversation, you're going to be having a team meeting, you're going to be selling to maybe it's a practice manager in a primary care organisation, in a GP practice. You could also be speaking to someone who is in a PCN or an ICS, as well as then speaking to someone at NHS England about a strategy that's coming out, or a piece of procurement policy or something like that. And so you have to be able to communicate your value to each of them, and understand where you fit. And we understood that between James and I, from his clinical perspective, having been an anaesthetist and worked obviously on the shop floor of hospitals. So we identified this need. I loved it because, for me, I was working with pharma, which was cool because there's big budgets. You can do sexy things in the same way that you can't when there are less budgets. But what I really loved was that I was really close to the impact. And I learned that that's what I needed from a career. I wanted to be purpose-driven. Everyone says this, right? But genuinely, maybe it's my ego, but I needed to feel that I was making a difference. And what I soon realized was that I wasn't just making a difference to the outcome of those companies. I was actually making a commercial impact internally, because I was helping set their business strategy. And more recently, I've come to realize, the way I think of it is that there are 4 cornerstones to a business. There's the finance. You have to be funded. There has to be a way, whether it's revenue, whether it's investment. You have to have talent. You have to have people. I'm going to forget what they all are now. Oh, product. Okay, so you have to have product, your technology. You have to have something to sell, to give to people, to solve their problem. But you also have to be able to communicate. And if you don't have one of those cornerstones, your business doesn't stand up. And the reason communication is so important is because you're doing it all day, every day. And so if no one understands your value, you can have the best product in the world made by the most intelligent people and the best people to create it. If no one understands that, then it's kind of irrelevant because it's not going to get where it needs to go and make the impact where it should. And so I saw very viscerally how actually just by doing some what seemed to me to be very simple and obvious things with these companies, I saw what impact that had in terms of building their brand and giving them that kind of commercial cohesion. So anyway, fast forward, I worked at another agency, and James and I, this niggling thing, it didn't go away, and we just saw this need increasing. And more people were coming and asking for help, and there came a point where we were like, actually, there's a jumping off point here, and that coincided with COVID. Which, funny enough, was kind of the, probably not renaissance, but it was a catalyst for health tech, definitely. People started showing interest. We had no other options. People were using it. And, yes, that we've seen kind of that rescind a little bit, but there was a huge need. And I think from there, we basically decided to just run with it and take the chance, because James had run businesses before. I had felt I wanted to perhaps do some freelance at some point in my life. In fact, I always said two things to myself. I would never have my own company and work with my partner. And I've somehow wound up doing both of those things. But actually it's worked out very well, because we both have very different backgrounds and are quite different people, but also really complement each other, I think. And that makes us, I think, incredibly dynamic and compelling. And I guess it also helps when you're in lockdown for 2 years and you're the only two people around to speak to. So I suppose it's a bit of an incubator for innovation, ideas, and perhaps doing things differently. So anyway, we kind of kicked off at the beginning of the pandemic. I handed in my notice at my job, and we were in stealth mode for quite some time. And initially, we just worked with a handful of health tech companies, really shaping our offer. It's very much kind of, I suppose, a beta launch, figuring out exactly what the need is and really refining our product, the quality of our product. And, you get things wrong along the way, but you also learn a great deal. And, don't get me wrong, it is probably the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the absolute best thing that I've ever done. And I would not say I'm a natural entrepreneur at all. I never set out to be someone who owned a business. I'm quite the opposite. And so I always say that I'm an entrepreneur by accident. It just doesn't come naturally to me. But that's been a real journey, and I've enjoyed learning through that experience and gaining those skills. And more than anything, actually, the confidence. The confidence has been really interesting for me, because it's something that's always been a challenge, and it's required me to just own myself, own our business, what we're doing, the way we're doing it. And I've had no other option. I've had to do that, and that has been a real gift, I think. And I guess fake it till you make it, but ultimately you're never really faking it. If you are genuinely good at what you're doing and you enjoy it, you'll figure it out along the way, and it'll be fine.
I've got a question for you. So clearly along this journey, you're a master at communication, and I can definitely say that because I'm a fan of the Healthtech Pigeon, and I just love the way you communicate through that. So I want to ask, when diving into sort of the communication, a lot of our listeners are going to be entrepreneurs thinking about founding a company, and they're now going to be starting thinking, how do I communicate with the world? Can you break communication down into some of the factors we should be thinking about? So, for example, I've noticed very clearly that the tone of communication varies depending on who you're talking to. And it's very clear with how SomX does it. And I just love that. But yeah, give us a few tips and tricks
on communication, on the factors we should be thinking about, be it internally communicating or externally communicating, and through whatever medium we choose. I'd love some tips for ourselves, to be honest.
Yeah, communication is super important. I'm clearly biased in that view, but you're right in that. So when people think of a brand, often they're like, I've got my logo sorted, I've got my brand. But the thing is, your brand is so much more than that. Your brand is everything that someone can see and hear and perceive of your company. And so your brand is therefore a lot more than the PNG that you stick on your homepage, perhaps get printed on a t-shirt. And so I think what that requires is some real dedicated thought around, it's probably sound a bit corny, but the personality of your organization. So you've probably already done thinking about what's your mission, what is it you're aiming to achieve, where are you headed, what's that big picture? And that's really important too, and we'll come back to that. But as an organization, I suppose it's in part your values. So, and your values are kind of your how you get there. But your personality is how you're going to interact with other people. And for some people, you could have a really nurturing tone of voice. And that could be particularly important speaking to certain groups. For example, if you are a consumer brand that is, or a patient group that are predominantly working with people who are accessing healthcare, you don't want to preach to them, you don't want to patronize them, but you also recognize that particularly if it's a patient group, they're likely to be going through challenges, and therefore you want to come across as being understanding and supportive of that. Equally, you're not going to want to be patronizing to clinicians, but clinicians are not going to probably respond to a tone that is so nurturing because they are more academic, they're more science data driven, they need evidence, but they also need reassurance too. And so the tone and the nuance is very different. So I think often just throwing words down onto a page about how you would describe your company or how you want people to describe your company is a really good place to start in that. And often you end up with a spectrum, and then you have to decide where on that spectrum you want to sit. So if you want to be nurturing, the other end of that is being direct. Well, you may choose another word. I'll choose direct for now. And so actually you may end up smack bang in the middle, or you may end up on the more towards the middle, where actually you have the capability to perhaps be more direct and authoritative, but ultimately, fundamentally, you have that nurturing tone of voice. So I think it's that. And I think the important thing to remember here is that that tone of voice and that brand is not your founders. That is not the people in your organization. It's a sum of all of those things. But I see a lot that often the company brand could be an extension of your founders and your founders brand. And particularly if you have the kind of company where you're looking to eventually get acquired or go for an exit, the two have to be very distinct, because at the end of the day, that founder may not always be there, that CEO may not always be there. And it's fantastic when you have big personalities and you can leverage that, but you have to be able to identify a separate brand and a separate personality away from the individuals. And that can be really difficult to do, especially as the founder, because it is your baby. It is your thing that you have lived and breathed and brought into the world, and you're having all of those conversations. And I think that's one of the benefits of working with someone from outside, is that you're bursting your echo chamber. It's easy as a founder and as a CEO and a senior leader in an organization to sit in that bubble, in that echo chamber, because of course you believe what you're doing is the best thing that has ever existed and it's going to solve all of these problems. But you get blind spots from that, and you have to be challenged on it. And I think, so whether or not you work with an agency, or actually you have some mentors or trusted advisors, or even just friends and family, who, by the way, everyone has their own bias anyway, but getting that outside opinion to kind of challenge you and say, is that the right tone of voice? Or actually, I don't think that, that doesn't resonate with me if I'm a patient. That's not how I want to be spoken to, or I would want to be spoken to if I was in a situation where perhaps I've just received a diagnosis for cancer. I might want this instead. So I think looking outside to get, I suppose a second opinion will really help you with that process. And what I often say is it's good to be aware of how other competitors are doing it, but don't stay in your lane and don't be too led by that, because ultimately they aren't you. And if you are trying to just do what is different to them, that isn't the essence and truth of who your company is, what your company is, and what it stands for. And so I think, yes, take note, be aware, but don't build your entire brand on trying to be different or trying to set yourself apart.
Yeah.
So there's that. And I think the other part of that is having, we call them key messages, but ultimately, I guess some key statements that you stand your company up on. So who you are, what you stand for, what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're the best people to do it. And that will take that's an exercise to do as a group, definitely. It's very, very difficult to do that on your own. And I've done a lot of these, and even I struggle to do that independently. It will take a lot of wordsmithing. People will quibble over certain words, but those are good discussions to have, because ultimately where you end up is somewhere where that everyone is comfortable and that reflects the conversations that people are already having. But it gives you consistency, and that consistency of language builds your brand. So your brand is as much the words that you use, the way that you use them, as it is your logo and your color palette and your website. So all of those things add up, but I think don't underestimate the importance of consistency of language, but also defining your company's personality and being really clear how that is different from the individuals in your organization.
I love how you mentioned about having mentors, coaching, and external people sort of uncover blind spots. On that point, have you ever come across a company, a founder, where they've come with a product, and the product and how they're communicating is clashing, and you've had to sort of say, no, you need to start doing it more like this, otherwise your consumers, your target audience will probably be alienated. Have you ever come across that? And what was how was the founder sort of receptive to that sort of advice?
So pretty much every client I've ever worked with, to a greater or lesser extent. And not that actually, what they were already doing, there was necessarily something really deeply wrong with that. But I think it's a confronting exercise for those kinds of people, I think. And they have to be in a place where they're willing to be challenged. Otherwise, you're never going to get anywhere, ultimately. Yeah. But I think in terms of getting them comfortable with it, I think is by sharing. So we always try and evidence where we're coming from, why we are recommending something. And also, I think one of the big things is that every company has to be able to do that too. So you can have these 4 statements, but ultimately you have to be able to evidence that you are who you say you are and you can do what you say you're going to do. We call those proof points. And that can be anything from your health economics data to the CV of your founders or people on your team to perhaps your revenue and growth over time. It's the data points that back up all of those things. And so it's that, I think, and kind of holding the mirror up, I suppose, and really getting down into the detail of, okay, so who are you talking to? Who are you talking to? Who do you want to influence? And what is it that they feel? What are their pain points? What are the challenges that they face? And all of the challenges, not necessarily the challenges specific to the solution that you have, but what frustrates them in a day of work, in a day of life, and how might they be feeling? And so I have to say, I don't think that I always really enjoy that part of working with clients. It's one of my very favorite parts, not least because it is a challenge. It really is. But you can see people's brains starting to tick. And by the way, it's not to disregard what they've done already. It's to filter what they've done already, figure out what's working, and provide them with a new point of view, or an updated point of view, should I say. And I think often they've come out the other side of that, actually having found that a really useful exercise, because it's given them an opportunity to reflect on how they communicate with their team, and the way that perhaps their sales team are communicating versus how their product team are communicating, and realizing that actually there's a disconnect there. And whilst obviously both those teams there's nuance in the way that they'll communicate and the things that they're communicating, but you have to have that consistency. And so when they can start to see how that all comes together, they get on board pretty quickly, I would say. But equally, you do have founders, as I said, there are particular words that they are obsessed with and they love, and there will be reasons for that. And so sometimes it's about finding balance to incorporate that with our perspective too, rather than just saying, let's just throw everything you've done in the bin and start from a blank sheet of paper. It's not doing that at all. And I think there are times where that is appropriate. There are times where that's not appropriate, and that might be because what they have is actually pretty good already. It just needs refining, or that you can see in doing that you're going to insult someone, and that might not be the best place to start a relationship. So it's I guess it's you have to be able to read the context and read the person and understand what, although they're a client and they've asked you to do this particular piece of work, reading between the lines to understand what it is they're really asking and expecting of you, and figuring out how they communicate, and I guess mirroring that to an extent.
Absolutely. I can tell you're definitely now a master at communication, because that is amongst the most difficult thing to do for founders. So as a founder, I can say when you get harsh feedback, the natural thing is, damn, that's my baby that they've just sort of said it's not right. And then you become, with the communication of that person, you become receptive and you go, hold on a minute, they're completely right. So yeah, you're right. That is amazing. I want to ask one more key question that I'm really personally interested in learning from you, and that's about community building. So we're told that communication is vital to building communities, and that's a community within a company and a community amongst your users and the people who are coming to sort of use your product or whatever it is, be it clinicians, be it the direct consumers themselves. I'd love to know a few tips on communication and looking to foster a healthy community.
I and we are of the belief that it comes down to one core thing, which is value. So you have a product, you have a solution, and that's great. That delivers inherent value. However, as a provider and someone, you're building relationships, and therefore what people remember is how you made them feel. And so, and what they got over and above what they were expecting to get. And that's not to say that you need to have no boundaries and go wild and just do everything for everyone. I'm not saying that. But in terms of building community, I think where we start with content is you have a product that's providing value. Through your content, you should talk about your product maybe 30% of the time max. We would aim for 10 to 20% of the time. The rest of the time, how are you adding value to the people that you want to connect with? Because that's how you build trust and you build relationships. And so often the way that you do that is through inspiring people, through educating people, or entertaining people. And that's quite a good framework, I would say, to operate through, whether you're creating content or you're building a community or running an event, is what value am I giving here? And so it kind of requires you to take away the ego a little bit. And something particularly around events and I guess community in that way, I've been reflecting on a lot recently about events that I've been to and communities that I've been a part of and their purpose and their role. And what I've seen is that often in those situations, or some of those events I've been to that have wanted to build community, the event really has been an opportunity for that company to showboat themselves, which, okay, cool, you're doing a really great thing. And sometimes that's really overt, sometimes it's thinly veiled. But ultimately, I then come away thinking, well, what was the value to me of that? I understand what you're doing as a company, and that's great, cool. But what have I learned from that? And what was I expecting to learn? And I think that's something that we've always stuck to quite closely, is if we're going to create a piece of content, or we're going to do an interview with a publication or run an event, who is it for and what value do we want to give them? And then work backwards from there. And that then gives you your plan, because you can figure out what it is that you want to say to give that value. You can figure out also who the people in the room or on the receiving end of that content should be, and who the people are that it should be coming from, whether that's directly or indirectly. So that could be your speakers on stage, that could be the person that gets interviewed for a blog article or for an interview with an outlet, or even, potentially a piece of content on your socials. And so if you always start from a point of, I'm here to add value, and then identify what that value is, I think the community will build naturally around it, because they will be so grateful for that. And it then becomes a two-way relationship, because you can ask them what they want too. And then you can address that, you can serve that. So rather than just guessing, you're actually crowdsourcing what that value could and should be. And yes, of course, there can be inherent value to you in doing so. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think by kind of putting yourself or your company or your product front and center, it detracts from the potential value that you can give. And it might be a bit airy-fairy, but I am personally of the strong belief, and I know James shares this with me, that if you put value out there and you put good out there, ultimately it comes back to you. And I don't think that should ever be your main driver. Don't do something just to receive something. It goes back to like being a kid and presents, right? And your parents have always said, don't give to receive. You give for the pleasure of giving. And if someone gives something back to you, that's lovely, but you haven't given someone a gift so that you get one back. And that's kind of a principle that I live by, work by, and I think that, we embody at SomX, is that actually we really care about the community in which we exist. So how can we give back to that? And if we benefit from that, great. But ultimately, we already benefit because it feels great. It's enjoyable. We enjoy doing that. And that's enough. So yes, of course, as organizations, there has to be a commercial element. In most cases, there has to be some ROI. But I think, consider how you look at that ROI, or what you consider ROI to be. But yeah, value first and foremost, put value at the heart of what you do, and community will form around it.
Definitely. I think the value-led approach always comes out on top. And obviously, I never knew you before SomX, but James has always, before SomX started, he was always out there giving value. When we were kind of building the brand, the brand hierarchy and all of these little things, he was helping us out with it, asking for nothing in return. I want to take a step back. If people were to see what you, James, the SomX team are doing, it's incredible. You're working with so many big brands, putting out content. But I saw something on LinkedIn recently and it caught me off guard. And the reason it caught me off guard was, when I see you as someone confident. When you're hosting the health tech events, you're on stage, you're very good at public speaking. But a few days ago, I read that when you were starting the agency, you were overwhelmed, you were crying for a few months. Tell us a bit more about that, because when people see you, I would have never thought, you're on the stage, you're super confident. It's the last thing I wanted to see. So I think it'd be quite interesting to touch on that.
It's a funny one. I guess it comes back to fake it till you make it. And I think we all struggle with imposter syndrome. Although what I will say is, a very good friend of mine who works in positive psychology said that actually imposter syndrome is a faux pas. It's actually known as the imposter phenomenon, because if you call it a syndrome, people think that there's something wrong with them, but that's not the case. It's a very natural feeling to have. Anyway, that's a side note. But yeah, I think I said before, I guess I always have struggled with confidence. However, I guess strangely, by something of an oxymoron, I've always been able to perform, I suppose, so I can turn it on. And whilst I did say earlier I wasn't necessarily creative, I've always danced and performed earlier in my life. And that's interesting because I'm naturally relatively introverted. I can be introverted, I can have extroverted and have my moments there. But I guess, you know, I kind of just feel like there's been no other option than to at least pretend to be confident, even if I'm not, because if I get up on stage in front of 250 people and I let my nerves get the better of me and I show that I'm not confident, I am going to feel horrible afterwards. I'm going to feel embarrassed, and I'm going to also feel like I've let everyone else down, and I'm representing my company that I'm incredibly proud of. And I think so probably there's something about the fear of not letting people down. But so, and yeah, I think, no, the honest truth is everyone's faking it until they make it. No one's as confident as they ever seem to be. If they are, there's probably something wrong. No, I'm joking. But and I think also I am no stranger to hard work. I've it's always just been very innate in me to be a hard worker from school and through all the work that I've done, all the jobs that I've had. And I knew that I was good at what I did, and I knew that I loved it. And as I said, I thought I knew what hard work was. But there is nothing that can prepare you for taking that leap from a very safe, secure role. As much as that in itself was stressful and hard work, there's nothing that can prepare you for taking that leap. And in all honesty, it was a shock to the system. I wasn't prepared for it, and I overestimated how well I'd be able to handle it. I think, to be honest, I handled it fine, but I'm also a crier naturally. I'll cry for any reason, and not because I'm sad necessarily. A lot of the time, yes, maybe I will be sad, but I'll be frustrated, I'll be angry, I'll be overwhelmed, whatever it is. Like, that's my natural instinct. So, you know, I'm not ashamed to say that, and I think that's okay. That ultimately it's a, you know, release of how you're feeling, and that's healthy. And I think, you know, if you let that bottle up, that's also never going to be a useful thing to you. But I think it's really important to be really honest about your experiences and how challenging you find things. And as I said, I wasn't ever naturally someone that had an affinity for wanting to run their own business, and going from being in a secure salary, a secure role, to being responsible for paying other people's mortgages and putting food on the table is really tough. But also, you know, building my reputation and the reputation of my company, that's a huge responsibility. And something I really wanted to do justice. And I didn't take that lightly, I think. And in all honesty, I probably not took it too seriously, but it was heavier on me than it needed to be. And so I think, you know, there's sometimes a perception that everyone should run their own business, and, you know, it's like the pinnacle of all things, and it's not for everyone. And I think we should be honest about that. I think there's nothing wrong with staying in a salaried role, and there are days where I sometimes think, oh, I wish. And then, but most of the time, 99% of the time, I'm so grateful that that's not the position I'm in. But everyone's different, and everyone needs something different. And I don't think it should be the thing that everyone needs to yearn for, because it's not always all it's cracked up to be. And yeah, I think you need the perfect storm for it to really work. And yeah. And I've been really lucky to go through that experience with James as well. I'm confident I would not have been able to do that on my own. And yeah, you have to have the right people around you, and you have to be able to understand each other and recognize that, yeah, sometimes I'm just tough. And it's also not easy to stand in front of someone while they're crying. And be like, I don't want to keep putting you through this. Are you sure this is what you want to do? And that's tough for anyone. As well as being the person who's feeling all of those things. And I think, you know, you'll know this as co-founders, you know, you have to be able to lean on each other as much as you have to be able to support each other. And I think, I suppose being able to be vulnerable in that way with a co-founder, I think, is a really important part of being a successful co-founding team. And that's not to say you need to necessarily bare your soul. I'm in quite a unique position where I live with my co-founder and we are in a relationship. Not everyone is in that situation, and that comes with its own trials and tribulations, but also comes with its great benefits too. And sometimes it makes life way easier, and sometimes it makes it way harder. But I think, I would just say, it's important to be honest and also not be ashamed of the times when you found it hard or you've questioned whether you're doing the right thing, and when something has shaken you or you don't feel confident. And actually, something I have been thinking a lot about recently is that a lot of my confidence has actually not come from myself, which is a really controversial thing to say because lots of people are of the belief that, you should, self-love, find your inner confidence, be your own cheerleader, which, by the way, I think is important. I do agree with that. But sometimes you need someone to believe in you. You need that as your proof point to finally believe in yourself. And I've been incredibly lucky through my career journey that I've had several people that have stuck their neck out for me and just gave me a chance where I honestly don't really know why, but they did. And that's what brought me to where I am today. And in them doing that has enabled me to then putting me in uncomfortable positions where I didn't feel ready to do something. That in itself gave me confidence, but also seeing that other people had confidence in me pushed me to then have confidence in myself. In part because I didn't want to let them down, but in part I was like, well, if they believe I can do it, there has to be some truth there. Like, these aren't stupid people. They know me very well, for better or worse. And so if they still think I can do it after that, there's got to be some truth there. So why don't I just give it a go? And for me, that those have been the seeds that I've nurtured. So it's me that has nurtured that, but they have planted those seeds, and I'm incredibly grateful for that because I think ultimately everyone needs someone. Everyone needs someone to say you can do it, and not just your friends, not just your family, the people who are gonna say it anyway. People that just come out of left field and just champion you for no explicable reason. That I think has untold impact on individuals and their trajectory in their career and in their life and where their confidence comes from. So I think you can find it in yourself, but ultimately it's not a bad thing to find it from other people. And that's not to say rely on other people for your happiness, your confidence, or anything like that. But I think when we talk about value, you can give value to people in that way by pushing them to do something they never thought they could do, or just creating space for them to feel vulnerable. And people have done that for me, and that's where I've had my confidence from. The fact I've not broken anything yet probably is a decent proof point too.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it feels, just hearing your journey, your story, it feels as if this whole new world opened up as soon as you kind of embarked on this journey with SomX, with James, and like you really come into your element. And all the little things you enjoyed in all those previous jobs, the creativity, the comms, the writing are all coming together now. The one thing I wanted to ask was, and you've been in a very good position, is there are other people that are not only opening up services, agencies, websites. What were the things you guys did to land your first client? Because for many people, that is one of the hardest things to do. What advice would you give to individuals like that?
I don't know if I can give any advice because I think we were in quite a unique position privileged position, where I didn't have a profile and I didn't have a network. And because in the worlds I existed in, that was just never a thing. Ultimately, the brands that you work for speak for themselves. No one has their own brand, and no one does their own content or anything like that. When you speak on behalf of the agency you work for or your clients. So you're very much kind of behind the curtain. James's experience was very different to that, where he had to put himself out there and built an incredible network and community around him. And, being really honest, that was what landed us our first client, because they had trust in him, because he had a track record. Now, while we were in stealth, there was potentially a time, if I speak very quietly, where there was maybe overlap. So I couldn't be really outwardly vocal about what it was that we were doing. And he could, and he had his podcast. He'd been working across these accelerators. He had, great relationships with investors, with, the NHS, with innovators, with, different programs, different people. And so I think when he decided to close down the accelerator, I think people were also quite curious, like, what are you doing next? And inherently kind of some people wanted to get involved. And so it was that. And I will always be very grateful that, we were able to benefit from all of that in a very overt way. And I guess the legwork he had done previously. Now, the legwork that I had done previously was very much in the background, and it wasn't the same because it was built upon my expertise, knowledge, and understanding of healthcare communications. And I didn't need a personal brand for that, whereas James did for what he was doing. And so I guess it was the coming together of both of those things. And yeah, people just putting their trust in us, which again, I'm incredibly grateful for. And, we still have our very first client. We still work with them. And as I said, we've got things wrong along the way. But I'm really confident that we've got better and better and better, and that snowballs. And, I am not ashamed to say no one can take that success away from us. And, you go through tough times, and I think as you evolve, challenges change over time. Things don't actually get any less hard. You just solve some problems and a whole new set of problems comes in. But also I think you learn to deal with them better. You become more resilient. But when I look back, so this Christmas just gone was a really, I guess, important moment for us, because if I looked back to the Christmas the year before, it was practically the tale of two cities. It could not be more different. There was 3 of us, the Christmas of 2021. I was crying a lot. And it was really tough. And then fast forward to this last year, things difficult in a different way. I wasn't crying. We have a team of 10 people, and it feels like we have an actual business. And the difference wasn't the fact we had an actual business. The difference was we believed it. We believed that we had a business. And, you look at your growth through that period of time, and I think, obviously you regularly look at your finances and your growth metrics and all of that kind of thing. Of course you do. You have those regular check-ins. But actually, when you have those 2 points that are so far apart and you see the difference and the growth across that time, it's huge. And that's really confronting. Whereas when you're looking at it more regularly, it's less obvious. It's like if, I don't know, someone loses weight or gains weight. If it's someone you live with, you might not notice on a week-to-week basis if you see them all the time. If it was like an uncle or an aunt that maybe you've not seen for 6 months, and they've gone on like some kind of lifestyle transformation, you're going to really notice that because of the period of time where you've not seen them. So I think it's, really important to have, I guess, those checkpoints and have that time to step back. But yeah, I guess I go back to what I said before, that getting your first client is tough. And I absolutely see that with companies we work with too. I think we were in a unique position where we had, I guess, we had a track record before we started, and we had a community before we started. And that gave us, I guess, pushed us towards being able to get our first client and our first couple of clients more easily than perhaps others would be able to. And I don't say that with any arrogance, because I think we were in many ways lucky, but I think that's also a culmination of all the work we'd done previously. Whereas, lots of companies are coming from a standing start, especially if you've built a product. And so convincing people to trust not just in you, but in that product is a different ball game to people just trusting in James and I. And, we've got a CV that backs up what we're doing. There's no kind of additional factor where you're going to have to trust in a technology or a platform or service.
No, definitely. And I think the one thing you mentioned, and it's nice to echo it, is you only realize how far you've come when you look back, and it's over a period of time. And it's always the small wins that lead to the big victories. And you can clearly tell with SomX. I remember when James was building in stealth mode, and he sent me kind of the PDF of the SomX branding. And he's like, "Hey, mate, I'm going to be launching this soon." And I was like, "Mate, this looks bloody sick." And following up, the question I had was, so I'm going to put my hands up. I used to think this whole PR, this marketing, this content was a gimmick. I thought it was all fluffy stuff. I never realized it was a real job, right? That's me being a traditional clinician.
You're not alone. Kind of I don't judge you for that.
Sort of. Do you know what I mean, right? So going into the world of entrepreneurship, startups, content creation, I know how incredibly valuable it is, even more so now. So for any health tech company that, let's say, they don't have the biggest budget in the world, they're probably bootstrapping, what are the first few things they need to get on point from a PR, branding, comms point of view, from your experience?
Well, first of all, I would say don't put yourself under pressure to get anything on point, because when you're that early on, you're not going to get anything on point. It's an iterative process, and be open to that. But I would say that I think community is an interesting thing. And don't get me wrong, building community takes a lot of resource and capacity. But I think even if you're able to just give consideration to what your community, so the different people that you want to be engaging with, what they need, think about that, and think about what is in your wheelhouse in order to help you address those things. And I think also, I know I said earlier about, separating out founders and, individuals in the company versus the company. Actually, sometimes the easiest way to start is for founders to be sharing their journey and talking about the things that they're interested in. I think that's a really good place to start, because ultimately people connect with people. We are humans. We are creatures that seek out relationships and connect over emotions. And I think by, being a bit vulnerable, but by sharing that experience, there'll be other people who will get value from that and will want to engage with you for a variety of different reasons. And so I think that's often a good place to start. I guess also caveating that with perhaps don't overshare. Maybe don't take a photo of yourself crying. Just talk about it 2 years later. So I think doing that. And I think also remember that actually connection is really important. So you don't have to be pumping out a load of content all of the time and speaking to the media all of the time. It's the conversations that you're having, perhaps the events and the meetups that you're going to are valuable too, and actually is an opportunity for you to hear from other people going through similar experiences, and get advice from people that you wouldn't normally necessarily have access to. So I think I wouldn't put pressure on yourself to kind of go all in right away, and I would also consider kind of the one thing that your company can talk about. And if that's one post that you put out or one blog that you write every month, do that. Start with that, because ultimately content that's published is better than content that isn't. And so you have to start somewhere. And the first post you do is going to be terrible. And make peace with that, because you will get better and it will get easier. And if putting half an hour in your calendar every week to come up with a post is the reminder that you need to do that, then do that. But don't overthink it. Post what's on your mind, and post about the thing that you think is relevant to your community, whether or not that exists, because ultimately your community will build around you. So I think it's that. And as I say, don't feel pressured that you need to have a huge marketing budget straight away, or you need to jump in with, having an all-service newsroom to try and get onto the front page of The Guardian, because also, I guess, that's not realistic. You're not going to get on the front page of The Guardian, even if you have the very best PRs in the business. but all of these things are about building up credibility. And, you know, I think it does take time, and you're never going to go from a standing start. That's not true. You can never say never. You are unlikely to go from a standing start. And so go as fast as you're comfortable with, and ask other people what they're also doing, who are going through perhaps similar experiences or a similar size, working in a similar space. Get ideas from them, and find out what's worked for them too. And again, it might be that having an intern is a good idea for you. I would perhaps challenge whether at an early stage an intern is the right approach, given that you need to be able to give them something, and they're obviously very early in their career, and ultimately you don't just want someone because they're cheap, but a freelancer or someone who can, you know, give you a couple of hours a week before you go in for a full hire or a full team or engaging an agency. And there are so many platforms out there that can help you with this stuff now, not least ChatGPT. Everyone's talking about it, and that's not to say just, you know, type into ChatGPT, write me content on this topic, or write me a LinkedIn post on this topic, because ultimately people are going to see through that. But use it to get inspiration. Don't feel that you need to kind of just pull something out of thin air. And if all that you can think of doing is resharing something that someone else has shared with one sentence with your view on it, that's enough. So yeah, just do something. And don't feel that you need to be speaking to all of the journalists at the national newspapers, or starting a YouTube channel right away. That might be right for you at some point in time, but go to where you feel most comfortable.
Yeah, I don't think we need to worry too much about the YouTube channel. Most medical shows have a YouTube channel already. Like every medical.
Yes, also true. Yeah,
but
yeah, correct.
The one thing you did say, that I resonate with is it's an iterative process. It's just making the start nice and slowly. And like you said, you don't need to be on national news front page the day you launch your product. And I think that's super important. And I think, and you echoed it before, a lot of founders, they want that overnight success. They want to kind of get all of these deals with all these hospital trusts and kind of do the $1 million fundraisers. And then I guess, you know, we live in a world where everyone's sharing all of these wins online, and you never get to really see the reality behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely. And that was exactly why I did that interview that I did, where I basically told everyone I cried for 3 months. Because it's not all sunshine and roses. And, you know, it's really easy to get caught up on all the celebratory posts that people put out there, which, don't get me wrong, I also love seeing. And it's amazing to be able to see people succeed. And it feels good when you succeed, and you inherently want to share that. But I also think it's really important to acknowledge that that's a snapshot. And, you know, there's a whole, like 95% of the journey that actually you're not seeing. And that can feel quite lonely. So if actually we're all a bit more open about those challenges, it helps us feel better, but also it's going to help other people, because they're not going to feel like they're the only person going through it, and they can also get advice and see how other people have overcome these things. So yeah, I think it's great when people succeed, but don't feel like everyone else is succeeding and you're not, because that's not true.
You know, no, definitely agree, and I think you perfectly put it. And just speaking to you, I think over an hour, one of the reasons as to why I think SomX is super successful is the human touch. Like, you guys are like genuine people. You know, it's not just a machine. You know, there's genuine value. Like, you do care about the brands and the clients you work with, and you do want them to succeed. And by virtue, that helps kind of SomX grow. But I'm super conscious of time. I know we've taken up a lot of your time and we started late, but I want to say a massive thank you, Jess, for kind of coming on the show, sharing the story. It's nice to hear someone working in health tech that also happens to be from a non-clinical background. And it's interesting to see the journey, what kind of brought you to this world.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. And I think, you know, for anyone, whether you're a clinician or not, I think if you're interested in health tech or whatever you're interested in, my advice is just say yes to things, because you never know where you're going to end up. And that's all I ever did. I said yes to things. I told you earlier, I thought I was going to be head of comms at the Met. I could not be further from that. And I am confident I'm a lot happier than I would have been if I was in that role. So I think sometimes just do away with the expectations, say yes to opportunities, and you'll end up in the place that you're meant to be. So you'll be fine. And health tech has so many opportunities for everyone. I think it's an incredibly inclusive place. There's of course more work to do to make us even more inclusive, but I think it really embraces people wherever they're coming from and wherever they're headed to, and that's one of the reasons why I like it so much. So yeah, never be scared about how do I get into health tech or whatever it may be. Whether you're a clinician or whether you're not, there's opportunities for everyone.
No, definitely. Love this episode. A massive thank you once again. I wish SomX, both you and James, all the best. And I know it's such an emerging field. Like, you guys are going to kill it. Absolutely. But yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
been good fun.
It has, yeah. I've loved it. I think I've been on a couple of podcasts, which I don't often have the privilege of doing. So it's been a lot of fun. So thank you for thinking of me, for inviting me. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, and it's always nice to chat to you both. So I will take any opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jess, and a massive thank you to all our listeners as well. We'll see you all next week.